Welcome back, everybody. I was away for a couple weeks. We are back with Kolton again. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Doing amazing, man. We had a little hour-long conversation before this, so ready to get into it.
Yeah, I know we should honestly record all the stuff we talk about. So we were going to talk about when to titrate doses up in a cycle. As an amateur, pro, whatever, bodybuilder.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's misunderstood. Same with food, right? Like when to increase stuff.
Mhm.
You want to talk about what your experience is with that?
Yeah. I mean, so there's a lot of different tactics here, and I think people oftentimes they look at the scale as a metric of success in the off season, especially in the prep too. But there's a lot of different. First of all, it's a physique sport, so we care about the physique. If your physique's not looking compatible with the sport, arguably you're not making essential progress. But I think that weight going up isn't necessarily the only predictor of progress, right? So what we want to look at is our options to manipulate essentially in the off season for forward progression is volume within training, calories being consumed, and gear being used. And oftentimes the question comes to which one comes first in the equation. Now, my simple framework is, it is just that, as a simple framework. And basically I focus on, if strength is plateaued, body composition remains relatively lean, you're for an off season at least, nowhere above 12% body fat, and it's relatively sticking there, and weight is sticking there as well, usually the answer is increasing calories if the body composition is still relatively good. Now, if the body composition, if let's say weight is going up but strength has not gone up and it's relatively stalling, and an individual's body composition is not improving, it's arguably getting worse, that's where you can define a need for more androgens. And I would start to titrate them at that point, and or growth hormone, insulin, those various compounds as well, trying to mediate obviously the inappropriate partitioning of nutrients to an appropriate partitioning of nutrients, so that an individual gains muscle, they aren't getting fatter, and they're just continuing to progress in strength and or movement progression at large.
Yeah. And you wouldn't, I would do the same thing. And I would typically not do them both at the same time, right? I typically don't raise food and androgens at the same time. One, because it's typically not needed. Like you said, there's a reason generally for one or the other. And also, if you move too many variables, you don't really know what was doing it.
Exactly.
Right? Because it's not necessarily either that's causing the stall. Sometimes it could just be one very specific thing. Like we talked about before filming, I think people misunderstand the raising of food. Right? Like the calorie requirement. There's an energy requirement to grow muscle, but it's not as great as people think. And it's really at the second step of protein synthesis. So it's not even the initial part of the mTOR stimulation. It's at the translation part, and it's very minimal. It's just the body just needs to sense an energy balance so it can, continue to grow. That's just a regulatory thing in nature. You're not going to grow muscle if there's no food.
Right.
But it's not this massive thing. And I think where it's misunderstood is guys will ask me, if I eat 5,000 calories a day, that's like a massive overage, right? But the problem is my maintenance, let's say, is 4,700 calories. So I'm technically not eating much over my maintenance. It's not this huge excess in food.
Right.
If someone only burns 2,000 calories, they don't need 3,000 calories a day. That's really just going to make them fat at a certain point. It's most likely they just need a slight increase over time, right? You don't want to see the scale. Like you said, the scale, it will move initially on a cycle, right? Because there's fluid in this glycogen and, extra blood and things like that. But you don't want to see the scale continually moving week by week, because there's no way that that's tissue. The human body can't accrue tissue at that rate.
Right.
Right. Like I say, the average successful bodybuilder is gaining, 10 to 12 pounds a year of tissue, real tissue. You're not really gaining much more than that. And that's a huge amount of muscle in a decade. That's 100 pounds.
Yep. Yeah.
But I think that on a weekly basis.
Right. And there's a very good study, and I cannot remember who it's done by, but it's a nutritional study where they took basically advanced lifters, and that's people they essentially qualified. I think it was over 3 years of applied training. and then relatively new lifters, and they had under a year's worth of applied training. And what they did is they put them in a caloric surplus to see if they needed a caloric surplus to build muscle. It's a pretty obvious study. And what they found was that even in the newbie group needed more calories to build, they had a higher threshold of muscle to build per week. So they needed more calories to support that, which makes sense, checks out. But that was still only about 350 to 500 calories at most in some individuals. And they still gained fat mass, but it just wasn't as much fat mass. In the advanced lifters, though, what was really interesting is because they weren't putting on as much muscle per capita of time, their caloric requirements to be in a surplus was only 250 calories. That's a fucking half a cup of rice, you know, like
and most guys do that at that each meal.
Exactly. And I think people get so fixated on gaining weight and putting on size and like living that bodybuilder lifestyle that they think it really does require a copious amount of calories to sustain a copious amount of mass. And it sure does. For you or I, people would look at our diet and be like, how do you eat this much? Like, what the fuck how do you guys eat this much? But it's just like, I don't think they conceptualize how much a lot of food is, for one. And the people who maybe don't understand what that looks like do it the wrong way. And they just start adding a ton of calories at random points in the day. And there's no chrononutrition attention. There's no micronutrient attention. It's just like a shit fest. And it's a really unfortunate thing because, again, like you said, if you're gaining a pound a week, which some people consider to be good, if you put on 10 pounds of muscle in a year, you're genetically elite.
Yeah, you're 50 pounds of muscle.
You're gaining 80% fat, you know? It's crazy.
And as your body fat gets up, right, for most guys, once it gets pro 15, most of it's going to start nutrient partitioning the other direction. It's going to go mostly toward fat at that point because you're just not able to push the nutrients into the cell because they're inflamed.
Right. And you have now at that point too, you have, you know, highly fulfilled intramuscular triglycerides, which is going to limit the insulin response within the muscle tissue. That it's just not a good effect. Like there's no benefit. I will never be convinced that there's a benefit, or I shouldn't be as objective, but there shouldn't ever be an event where I get convinced that being a higher body fat than 12 to 13% is necessary to succeed as a bodybuilder.
Not as a bodybuilder, perhaps as a big strength. Like if you're a strong man and you need leverage, that's different. That's not necessarily that's just for leverage and protection of joints and you know, just extra mass to move a 400-pound stone. That's a little different.
Right. Yeah.
For aesthetics, and you blow your waist out. Like my age, like I can't afford to have my waist go up by inches every year and then come back down because it won't go back down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that the transverse abdominis, I mean, it's very clearly defined that it weakens through age, but it also weakens through distension, through stretching. And that is exactly how you get waist distension, is by pushing so much food that the transverse abdominis becomes stretched and relaxed, and then it just simply cannot hold your organs or stomach in like it used to, and your waist distends, and it's not a good look. It's happened to me because I thought the answer was pushing food at a very young age, and it sucks. You know, it's not something you can easily reverse, and you have to practice a lot. John Jewett has done a good job at that. You know, he really built a strong vacuum in 2 years time, which is impressive, but not many people can do it.
No, definitely not an open, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's something I work on with my open guys is their digestion. It's hugely important, especially one of my guys his high days at 9,000 calories and his mediums at 7,500. I think his low is 45 or 5,000. That's his low day. He's starving at 5,000 calories.
Right.
But we have to focus on things like digestion, because if you eat 9,000 calories of chicken and rice every day, you're going to destroy your health.
Right.
You can't live
regardless
of what's something for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then and I think also there's a misconception too about gear amounts and when they need to be titrated up, depending on amounts. I had a guy that I work with ask me earlier today, if I were to work with someone that was using between 300 and 600 milligrams of gear and potentially growth hormone or whatever, when you raise food. And the first thing I said was, well, that depends on the person, because 300 milligrams to 600 milligrams might be someone's cruise amount.
Right.
That might not be a blast. So in that case, you wouldn't be raising food at all. You'd be lowering food.
Right.
You couldn't even base it on a gear amount. Depends on the person, right? Some of the bigger pros are cruising on a few grams of gear.
Right.
And
Right.
blasting on. So you're not necessarily going to go by that. And then again, it's not necessarily just increase the food at a steady. I don't ever find there to be a steady interval where things just increase automatically. Like you said, there's metrics that occur that then we base progress based on those things, not so much just on like an arbitrary number.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a whole conversation, right? I think each bodybuilder has their own unique need to make progress. For me, I need a lot of androgens. It's just like what it is. Like I don't grow at the rate that other guys we talk to grow at all. Like I'm not even close. I am not ever going to be someone at a pro level stage. Like it won't happen.
No, I wouldn't.
It would require grams and grams and grams of gear that I'm probably not willing to ever take.
Yep.
And that's just facts, but another guy can, Keon Pearson, worked out at my gym, and I don't know if he was saying the truth, but he would basically say like, hey, 600 to 800 milligrams was his Olympia cycle. Like
I saw his first pro cycle. It was very low. It was weird. It was mostly orals. It was strange stuff. But but
it was just orals.
He was like a freak when he was a kid.
Mm-hmm. Dude was at 16, he probably had a better physique than you or I, and he didn't even train.
Yeah, but those are the guys that go to the Olympia stage. That's
exactly
the same pro I was talking about that is on 9,000 calories. He's only been lifting for 4 years. He's really been lifting weights for 4 years, and he's an open pro.
Yeah.
The first month you ever lifted weights, he was the biggest dude in his gym.
Yeah.
You're either born that way or not. But I think also with the gear amounts too, I think, there are guys that are freaks that like don't need a lot. But I think the truth is the majority of them probably use much more than they talk about. And I get that they don't want to talk about it. Like you and I see these things, and it's just, it's probably not something they discuss. Roman is pretty open with this stuff, but I think a lot of those guys just don't care to talk about it. But it's pretty standard. I don't know of a whole lot of open pros that are using less than 4 grams.
Right.
Well,
I mean, if we just take Roman and think of him as like, let's just say he's like 1 out of 3 open bodybuilders, and he's taken up to 30 units of growth hormone, several grams of gear, like
4,200 milligrams currently a year.
Right.
Closer to 5,000.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, if he's just 1 in 3 open IFBB pros, like he is probably a good representative of what at least a 33% of them are on, and if not, maybe some are on more, maybe some are on less, but
there definitely are some on more. It depends on the person and the risk. I mean, I think that's a lot of it. It comes down to your risk tolerance too, right? So something like you said before, and I'm in the same boat. There's the only way that I'd ever get to that level, if it's even possible, is to push 10 grams of gear.
Right.
I'm not willing to accept that risk because it's going to kill me. Right.
Yeah. I don't feel that a necessity to be that either. Right. Like a lot of these guys have this dream and they want to chase it. And this is, I love the sport. I love the dream. I love helping these guys, but I don't see myself like standing in that spot. It's not my passion by any means, I just love to be a bodybuilder, but not at the Olympia stage. Right. So, I think, in titrations, there's an interesting point you said here. Like when I do titrate doses, I think it's like for me to see a like notable effect, like a statistically significant effect, it's usually by 100 milligrams, no more, no less. Like, and I see people, and I might even err on the side of more if the guy, like, 100 milligrams for someone could be 10% of their cycle's current total dosage, but it could be 3% for another person's total cycle dose. So usually though, it's somewhere around 100 milligram titration, not 50, not 25. Like a lot of people think like 25 milligrams or 50 milligrams of a titration is going to make a big difference, and it will absolutely do nothing for you. Like you won't be able to measure any effect from that, unfortunately.
And it goes both ways. I think that was an interesting way to look at it, as a percentage of a total. I don't think I've thought about it in those terms. I think that the titration amount is based on their experience and their total gear usage, right? So like, unfortunately, 100 milligrams, like 100 milligrams for someone like me, additional isn't going to do anything.
Right.
But if you're on 200 milligrams of androgens, you increase it by 100, that's a huge bump, right? You're on 3 grams of gear, and you wouldn't even think about bringing up by 100 milligrams. What does that do?
Yeah, it's at least 500.
And that's also kind of my message to younger guys that are getting into this, is you don't want to increase by huge amounts initially anyway, because once you go to higher amounts, you're kind of stuck there.
Yeah.
You're not going to run 3 grams of gear and then the next cycle use 500 milligrams. You're not going to get anything out of it.
Right.
It's a shame, but the odds are very slim that you're going to go down.
Yeah. And I think even more so, it's a mental thing than a physiological thing. Like once you're at a certain dose, like once you feel what a gram of testosterone feels like, you're not going to want to go back to, 350 milligrams of
You don't even
testosterone.
feel it.
Yeah. It's just not how it, like it is from speaking from experience. Even I truly think there's like some, epigenetic changes that happen in like our hepatic system or something. But like once you go up to those doses, it's like things change in your body, and those things can relate to hunger. Like you just crave large amounts of food, even when you're not trying to eat a lot of food,
Yeah,
or
just
just
all
trying to be a normal human being, or you just need more water, you need more, and it's just like at that point you change as a human being and you need constantly more, and that includes androgens. I feel as there is some sort of epigenetic change that can
well,
be relatively
you've made more
impactful.
androgen receptors. So
Yeah.
now, so if you were using, if your max was 300 milligrams, this is a rough example that's not based on any actual hard science, and no one needs to fact check this or do any math here. If you were using 300 milligrams max, and that was, and you were 80% saturated with androgen receptors, you would feel a certain way, right? But if you go up to a gram, and now and over time you've now generated new androgen receptors, and now you're at 80% at a gram, you go back to 300. I don't math off the top of my head. You're at, what are you at? Like 20%, something.
Right.
You're not going to feel very good at all, and you're going to start losing
Right.
androgen receptors. That's why you're going. You also have something called the calcium ion gated channel that you get
Yes.
guys. This is kind of an interesting thing too. I meet a lot of guys, more lifestyle guys, that chase a feeling on gear. It's
Mm.
generally sexual, and they're constantly chasing something. So they do a dose, and it tends to be the guys on the lower TRT doses that I'm not even sure what they're really doing. It's the guys that are on like 140, 160 milligrams of something, and they're chasing having a constant erection, right? And
Yeah.
that's a metric for some sort of progress there. And they're always playing with this, and they can't seem to get it straight. Well, the problem is once you've stimulated that channel, the nerves start to get basically homeostasis occurs,
Right.
and they no longer sense this anymore. So you need to constantly increase the dose. It's like any drug. And the
Hmm.
problem is, just because 140 worked previously, once it's homeostatic, it will no longer work. Like
Right.
you're gonna have to continually increase it, because it's not
Right.
a normal, regardless of what people want to think, it's not normal for a 40-year-old man to have an erection every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not common,
It's,
and trying to force that situation all the time is not going to happen.
right. It's not healthy either. I mean, you're going to
No.
cause like there's true nerve damage that can happen to penile tissue, and that's not good when that happens, and that can happen from overuse and abuse. So anyways,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, but that's the same thing. So you're constantly pushing it higher and higher and higher, and you're constantly chasing something higher and higher.
right.
Like,
Yeah. It's
I
never,
find it very difficult to eat. I don't even know if I could eat below 3,000 calories. It's just
yeah.
mentally, it's not a struggle with the food; it's the appetite.
Mhm. Yeah. And the other thing too, right? And this is an experience I had really hard in Japan was I walked 20,000 steps a day, right? Which is a lot for a guy our size. And it's like, uh, that plus eating 3 to 4 times a day. And I'd have for breakfast, they eat soups or ramens out there. It's not like a American breakfast by any means. So I'd have like a big bowl of ramen, which is like 1,000 calories with a bit of fat and protein and carbohydrate from the noodles. And I mean, like an hour after just moving around, it's like I'm going hypo. That would never happen to me before. But like now, and I think it's due to the hepatic system or something, right? I go hypo so quick. Like I can just be walking around doing my business and eating like a normal human being, but I'll go hypo.
Yep.
And it's just that new precedent I need to sort of like set for myself. Like, okay, I know like you guys can do this, but I need a little bit more like food here to sustain growth or to sustain just function.
It's health. Yeah.
And just like keep myself moving. And it sucks, but it is what it is at this point.
Yeah, that was one of honestly, to me, the biggest benefits of growth hormone is that it kind of keeps me from generally from going hypo, because I went hypo
Yeah.
much easier
Yeah.
previously. But it happens, right? If any of those days, like I'm like, you know what, I'm not going to eat that much today. Let's cut a little bit. Like by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my blood sugar's at 50.
Yeah, exactly. Dude,
Even if I've had 300 grams of carbs up until that point in the day, it's just not that amount of food anymore.
Right.
And you don't have enough fat to really, you're not really able to sustain yourself on what you have on your body.
Right.
In a healthy way. But I think, I just think it's going back to the topic at hand. I think the problem is there's no the simple way. There is no simple way, and there is a simple way. The simple explanation is, as progress does come to a halt, right? You have to increase something. And you generally do it in steps: food, androgens, you go back and forth, right? Until you run out of room. We talked about this with the myostatin thing as well, because it's the same thing. You have to continue to do that to continue to make progress to some degree, or you have to lower the dose and kind of reset things. It's not resetting androgen receptors, that's resetting growth regulating factors. That's very different. But there's no, on the other hand, there's no simple way just to predict when someone is going to need more, what they need, right, until they get there.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And it's, and I would argue too, to be honest with you, it is a back and forth thing where it's between food and androgens. But I would argue that honestly, from more often than not, it's probably not. Like, calories are king, and I don't want to create disillusion within people. If you're not eating enough food, you will not grow. Yes. They're king. Like,
I didn't mean that when I said that.
Over everything. But I do think that more often than not, people need to titrate androgens as opposed to food, and especially in an off-season setting. Because again, if you're gaining a pound a week, it might look good on the scale, but it's not going to look good on you for long. And it's more often than not that you should be aiming to gain. Like, I usually have people, depending on their weight, aim for like 0.25% of their total body weight on average per week. If we're gaining that, you're in a really good spot. And usually you want to mediate that by androgens until strength becomes an issue, body composition is improving, if not, staying the same. Then you can add some food, but you're only adding 100, 200 calories per week until you see a notable effect within the subsequent week. And this might be too conservative, but at the end of the day, I just don't see a need to get obese. I just don't see that need anymore in bodybuilding. I don't see a need to get above 12, 13% body fat, because at the end of the day, it's about competing. And if you're having to do 20-week long preps to get ready for a show, how many preps are you going to do a year? How many shows are you going to be able to reproduce a year? Versus if you just stick at 12%, Milo Sarchev is a really great example of this. He would get ready for a show in 4 weeks time. Like, a promoter would call him and be like, "Hey, could you do the show?" And he'd be like, "Sure." And he'd just start eating a little bit less, doing a little bit more cardio, and then by 4 weeks time, he was ready. And if you can live bodybuilding like that, you're going to find much more enjoyment, I think, because the sport at the end of the day is all about progression. And if you just use it as an excuse to eat, get fat, and train semi-okay, like it's just not a good lifestyle to follow, in my opinion.
No. But I stay roughly where I would be 8 weeks out all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm 50. So if I can do it, I mean, there's genetic things involved too, but if I can do it at my age, there's no reason why a 25-year-old kid can't do it, regardless of genetics.
Exactly.
Like, I'm twice your age.
Exactly. And it is an interesting thing to me that it is so driven into the bodybuilding scene that you need to mass to like get huge, and you do need to eat calories, but it titrates as you do. It's not something I'm going to eat 4,000 calories because that's what Kurt does, or I'm going to eat
it's relative to your physique.
Exactly. It's so relevant. And a 180-pound guy, let's be honest, you don't need a ton of calories. No. Like, unless you're genetic.
If you spend time around any of the bigger pros, you'll notice that most of them don't get obese in the off season.
Yeah.
Like
John. They hold water. But that's
John Jewett was pretty freaking amazing at the Arnold, and he was very far out from a show at that point. They don't, and he's eating a lot of food. A lot of these guys, Gabe does the same thing. Roman never gets out of shape.
Right. Roman's fucking
all year round. But I'm saying that's these guys, and Roman eats a ton of food, but that's relative to his size and what he needs to. Right. When he went to the hospital to get his hip replaced, and he lost like a massive amount of weight just because he couldn't eat enough in the hospital.
Right.
But that's not, he's not eating like that to get obese. He's making forward progress. It's probably only a slight amount over what his maintenance is to make forward progress. Otherwise, you'd be getting fat. And there's no reason. You could change the name of the off season to like the progress season, right? That's all you're doing is you're making forward progress. You're not supposed to be off. You're never really off from being a bodybuilder, whether you're competing or you're not.
Yeah. Right? You're like still in.
Like you and I still live that way, basically. Where that's my body composition is still front and forward in my mind. It's not the most important thing in my mind, but this is something that I do every day.
It's massive. I mean,
my life.
Right. Like, I don't want to be fat, even if let's say it would mean 5% more progress. I don't think there's a huge takeaway from that progress if I have to cut that fat off at some point, because you're going to
mass anyway.
Exactly. Like, the couple grams you gain from eating a bit more calories than you should have is probably not going to be substantially represented in the end physique anyways. It does so many things for you. It limits the total amount of dose you need in a prep because you don't have to be worried about conserving as much muscle as you can because you're cutting so hard. It limits the amount of time you have to diet for, which is just favorable as hell. And then it maximizes the amount of shows you can do per year. So let's say you do get qualified for nationals, then you don't have to go through a 22-week prep to get shredded for nationals. You can seriously take 12 weeks and spend the rest of the time massing, but doing it moderately. It's a win-win situation. If you can gain, 3 pounds post-show every show of lean mass,
Huge.
You're winning.
Huge.
You're winning. And competing every, 20, 40 weeks, it's like, that's a huge win. Definitely. Massive.
And just on a side note as well, with all that, because I think that there's a lot of guys that watch this stuff. There's a lot of guys who talk to both of us that want to be coaches at a high level. I think there's something to be said about your body composition if you want to do that. So I have to walk the walk as you do, right? No one's going to listen to me if I can't do it to myself and I don't stay a certain way.
Right.
Exactly. Because there's something, I get it. You and I are smart guys, but at a certain point, there's tons of intelligent people who look horrible. No one's listening to them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. AJ Sims is a great example of that. He posted that picture on his Instagram the other day. It was like his quads were fucking cross-striated as shit. And I was like, holy Christ, man, the guy's fucking lean.
Yeah. It's crazy. He holds it, right? I mean, at one point, I think he was 250 when he was competing.
That's nuts, dude.
But I mean, he's 185 right now. Yeah. He's shredded all the time. I mean,
he looks good.
That's what you do, right? If you want guys to listen to you, you got to live it.
Right.
And I think you are when it comes to coaching, you are your brand. So
yes.
How do you want to represent that brand?
Yeah, entirely.
Cool. Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate the time.
For sure. Anytime, man.
It's more regular again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I'll link your stuff down below. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Appreciate it.